personal humanity to reconnect with our shared humanity. I am so excited and enthusiastic about this conversation with Lauren Footman, principal consultant of Lauren Footman, LLC. That really doesn't capture who she is. I mean, this woman is expansive. I am just grateful to be witnessing her journey. And Lauren, welcome.
Thank you, Kelly, for this opportunity. I'm really excited to delve into this conversation today.
Yeah. So why don't we start with setting up, if I were a 6-year-old child, Lauren, and you were going to explain to me in a way I could understand what it is that you do.
Absolutely. I would say that I help and equip, which is equip is a fancier word to say give the tools to individuals and companies to reach their goals. And so some of those goals could be thinking about how they show up to help their teams drive the outcomes or accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish. So really providing people the space and grace and tools to help them build and expand their toolbox to become the best version of themselves.
Oh my gosh, that's a great way to explain it. Okay, so what was it in your soul that drew you to this kind of work? Because you and I both know, being like, I'm a coach, but I'm also a consultant. It's not an easy world out there. Like, why would you want to do that?
Absolutely. I sometimes think about what are the things that I needed or sometimes still need to succeed. And particularly as we are in this ever-changing landscape of so many things, whether it's how we work, whether it's how we experience the environment, particularly coming out of the pandemic and the social justice uprisings. One of the things that has remained consistent for me is how can I help others? And that cliche comment, like, what are you doing for others and how are you leaving the world a better place than the way you found it? And from my own experiences and also exposure, recognizing with the skill sets or the experiences that I have, I'm like, this is how I can make meaningful impact in a way that is not only helpful for individuals, but helpful at the larger societal level, but then also allows me to show up in a way that is authentic for me and allows me to show up as my best self.
Oh, you're giving me chills. Okay, so that's awesome. And what I'm wondering is if there was a pivotal moment that you could share with us in your career that significantly shaped your leadership style.
Absolutely. I would say there's been 2 moments in the last probably post-pandemic experiences that really have informed how I want to show up and continue to develop as a leader. One was when I worked in a nonprofit space and really having a leader who really focused on putting the staff first. And so some of the times we say, like, we want a supervisor or a boss or organization to really care about the whole person. And that during that time, I was experiencing the pandemic individually, collectively, as we were all wondering, like, what is happening around us? And he just told us, like, prioritize yourself. And so in prioritizing myself, I was just like, is this real? Because, we hear a lot of these things, but then are people really committed to what that means and how that may actually impact the business? And so he was very willing to listen, not only to my personal experiences, but then when I was able to show up at 100%, really valued my different perspective that I brought to the table that was different than his as an older man who identified as white and Jewish. And we were able to really connect across our differences and find commonalities. And so seeing that as a leader really helped me see it's not just what you say, but how you deliver on the commitments that you say in your mission, vision, and values, and thinking a lot about organizations that say that they value equity, but then they don't have pay equity, or at least are not trying to get towards pay equity, or they don't have a psychologically safe environment. And so seeing someone that was vulnerable, but then also was committed to aligning the policies and procedures of and practices of the organization to get to that utopian society, understanding that the journey never ended, really stood out to me. And it helped me when I transitioned to my next role of, if I wasn't feeling well at work that a certain day, I would take off. because I would tell my team, like, if you don't feel well, don't come in. But if I'm coming in, it sends the indirect or subliminal message like, no, we have to push past it. And so really being able to prioritize my own well-being and encouraging my colleagues and team members to do the same. And then I would say I've had experiences that were not so positive where I was like, if I could have experienced maybe X, maybe I would have been able to thrive in certain environments. And so taking the good and the not so good, or the sometimes just downright ugly experiences of working in spaces where you're like, oh, they're saying all the right things. And then it's like, oh, it's a totally different reality, and having to navigate the very real impact of that on me physically, mentally, and saying, how do I want to be as a leader so I don't have this impact on the people around me? But then also from the infrastructure level, what are some of the things that we can do to, even if you have bad actors and or people that don't follow the rules and the policies, that there are at least safety nets so things don't necessarily get out of hand. And so thinking about how I show up as a leader and how I lead by example, but then making sure that I am at least recommending, because, you know, you can make all the recommendations, but if you're not the final decision maker, but how are we thinking about systems and how they can at least be safety nets for when sometimes we have bad actors that facilitate harm of employees and or external partners.
Gotcha. And how would you describe your leadership philosophy? How have all of those things that you described helped it evolve over time? And I was really glad that you hit the contrast, because it's great to have those positive moments, but really it's the contrast that kind of shapes and molds us. So I'm just wondering how those moments may have impacted the evolution of your leadership philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the quotes that sticks well with me, for whom much is given, much is required. And so that is one of the things that I often go back to. And so when I think about the positive and the negative, that I've had the ability or the tools to navigate those things, that how can I pay that forward? And so making sure that I am making the time to connect with women, professionals of color, who are maybe navigating similar circumstances that I've been through, and recognizing even in that some of my own privilege that I've had to be able to be very outspoken and take chances and deal with the consequences, or that's not always that easy. And also using some of the positions that I've had to be able to push the conversation forward. And so it's been thinking about how can I provide one-on-one support to people under that mantra of who much is given, much is required, but then also thinking about when I am in spaces and certain topics are brought up or certain questions are asked, really having those uncomfortable conversations and holding the line for people that maybe don't necessarily have the safety net, the security, or the relationships to be able to take those chances, but recognizing that a lot of the work that pushes the conversation forward are based in risk that I sometimes can take that others can't. And so thinking about when I am the one having the conversation on behalf of community, but then also thinking about how I'm balancing the real need to censor those who are being most impacted by whatever I'm doing, whether it's advocating for a HR policy or something that communities need. And so balancing and really showing up as much as I can. But I think a part of what has evolved in my connection to that particular passage is, but making sure that I'm not doing it at the expense of myself. And so that has been one of the biggest takeaways, I would say, in the last 3 years, that I really started to hone in on how am I showing up for others? How am I leading by example? And part of that is, again, making sure that my cup is full as much as possible. And having to have those hard negotiations of I really want to engage in this conversation and maybe I can, but maybe not in the way that I was asked, or maybe not today. And getting comfortable in that as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you brought up privilege, because right after George Floyd's murder in 2020, a lot of the people I was coaching, and the majority of people I coach is white straight men, were asking me, like, they were saying things like, well, I struggled. I don't have privilege. I was like, yeah, that's not what it is. It's so from your perspective, because I know what it is. And luckily I have loving people like you around me who are like, nope, that's not it. You're off track. Let's go this way. I understand inherently what the privilege is. And when I figured that out, I figured out how to leverage that to open doors, right? And let the other people behind me. But if you could explain it from your perspective, how it shows up for you, that would be really, really helpful.
Absolutely. Because I think it's interesting when you were talking about your clients, because I think when people think that the poster child of privilege is like cishet white men, and it's like no one else has it. And I think that sometimes that's what they understand too. So then they don't engage in the conversation. But it's like, no, if you listen a little bit longer, we're not saying that you're the only ones that have it. We may say that in most situations, you often wield or yield the most. Privilege is having the ability to not be affected by something, and or if you're affected, having the resources to be able to bounce back in ways that are that your whole trajectory and or this situation is not completely disrupted indefinitely or definitely. And so one of the things, an example that I would give of myself is that in my last role, I was a diversity officer. And so there was a lot of conversations that we talked around equity for our external constituents, but then also how employees were. And so after a while, things got very toxic in the environment, and a lot of people did not have the ability to go through the necessary channels to file complaints because people were like, well, what about my job? What about all of the things that I've worked so hard for? And I had the privilege to say, you know what? It's bigger than me. I'm going to file the complaint, and I'm going to file the internal complaint, the EEOC complaint, the PHRC complaint. And ultimately that resulted in me being given an ultimatum, okay, sign this agreement and remove all of your remove all of your charges against us, right? And I was like, no. And so they were like, okay, well, you don't work here. And I was like, okay. And most people are like, oh my God, why did you do that? You're walking away from a 6-figure salary. It's a title. It's government, you can do these things. And I was like, but it's not worth it. However, I had to take a step back and say, most people, number one, are just scared to rock the boat. And then we've all seen House of Cards. We've all seen the recent news media of what elected officials in power structures across industries do with people that are considered a whistleblower. And so I was like, you know what? But it was a privilege to be able to say that I felt like I had the community, I had the financial resources, and I had other opportunities lined up where I was like, I can take that chance and feel comfortable. And where it didn't mean that I didn't have bad days or I didn't question, but I'm able to continue to thrive. I'm able to continue to make great connections. I'm able to continue to show up as a better version of myself. And so that's privilege, to be able to say, I'm going to rock centuries of corruption, discrimination, misogyny, and just be like, no, I'm just gonna stand up against it, and then still feel like I'm going to be okay, and not just feel, but be okay and end up in a better situation. But that's because, I'm in a doctoral program. I've had experiences. I had an LLC and had the foresight to be able to recognize and have relationships to say, DEI work, it evolves. And so my role was actually created 2 years post George Floyd. And soon as things tamper down in affirmative action, it was just like, oh, this is the perfect exit way. You're rocking the boat, and we don't really want to talk about these things. We don't want to give money to these topics. Go. And I was like, but this is actually an opportunity for us to continue the conversation. And so that's an example of privilege. It's having the ability, not that you won't face adversity, but when the structures and or interpersonal situations happen, you have the connections, you have the financial means, you have the resources, and again, resources is broad, to navigate and not be impacted or as impacted and end up in a better situation.
I mean, that was a beautiful way to explain it. So, and, it's so funny how parallel our lives are. I mean, that mantra, too much is given, much is expected, has like literally guided my life. I mean, that's how the cohort happened. I mean, I told you that story, and I was like, I had already put my money where my mouth was, but I was like, what more can I do? But yeah, I mean, I got laid off too for, filing a complaint, and I had never filed a complaint before. In fact, I was like hysterical crying as I was talking to corporate HR, and then 6 months later I got laid off. But I had the privilege at that moment in time of getting I was able to claim unemployment and got a severance package, which not everybody gets. So I had the privilege to have like 6 months of runway to create this business, and 15 years later, here we are. So yeah, I mean, I totally get that in a different way.
No, it's a very similar way, and I think that like you were able to see you were able to like grasp the opportunity, right? You saw it as like this situation of like, this wasn't what I planned when I started the year, but nonetheless, here we are. And then you were able to, take the lemons and literally like make lemonade with your own recipe. And I think that is a part of the privilege conversation of like, and that's how I look at it. I was like, no, it's not easy. And it's been like going back and forth with like legal counsel. I'm like, well, what is this? Have you gotten what you needed yet? And all of those different things. And so I was like, that's a part-time job in itself. But then even from that perspective, when I talk to people who have gone through the process, they were just like, I don't even know how to navigate the EEOC process. I don't even know how to go through and talk to PHRC and understand that actually you file with EEOC and then you do a cross-filing. And so I had the privilege to retain a lawyer while I was still employed and say like, I already see how this is going to go. And when talking to people, they're like, part of the reason why most EEOC complaints don't ever get addressed is this because you have to have certain language that oftentimes only people in HR and with legal backgrounds even know how to do. And so I was just like, wow. And so like that opened my eyes on a totally different perspective of, I'm like, well, I feel confident in this process. We're going to move forward. But so many people that I've talked to, they're like, I've contacted EEOC and I don't think I'm pulling the right levers, or I don't even know how to begin the process. And particularly when talking to people in this space from the DEI and HR perspective, they was like, from the organizational side, it's all about wearing you down. So like, if you don't have like systems in places to really be able to say, because like my lawyer was like, we'll just deal with it, just don't respond. Anything you get, we'll just handle it. But that's a privilege in itself. And that's why most people end up dropping it because they don't have it's not even finding the emotional like bandwidth to relive the trauma of whatever they're bringing forward.
Yeah. And then the questions you get from the lawyers is always interesting too. And I didn't know that. I just learned that right now about the EEOC. I don't even know who the PHRC is.
The Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. And so interesting. I was at a conference and I saw someone that worked for them and they were just like, oh, you can cross file. And I was like, no, I didn't know that. And so like I was learning something going through the process, but of course my legal team was like, yeah, that's a part of our standard thing. And I was just like, I would have never known to do that. And so when I've worked inside of organizations, I've never seen a lot of cross filings. I've always seen EEOC, but did their lawyer provide them that option? Because these were sometimes even people with legal representation, and just recognizing why it's important to know. And so like information and access is like the biggest privilege I would say that I have, is really having the ability to, if I don't know something, like of course there's Google, but then having the ability to go to experts in certain fields and say like, well, what about this? And I was just talking recently to Ernest about a question, and I was like, I have a like a comm/PR question. And he was like, he got me together, but I was like, most people can't say, like, I'm just going to call Ernest Owens and be like, this is what they're saying, but does this make sense? Does this align? And just like connection to informed individuals and subject matter experts in their field, like that's such a privilege.
Oh, it so is. He just helped me with a recent situation that I don't want to share on this podcast, but it was somebody who was recently, which I knew, revealed to be a very toxic individual, creating, and the women who wrote the open letter were all women of color. And I was like, how do I do this? Because I experienced everything that they're talking about. And I did talk to people in the organization about this individual. And, but I also don't want to be like coming in and riding on my horse, like, hey, let me jump on your coattails. And I called him and he was like, you know, your heart's in the right place, but don't, like, this is not, you will have a chance to talk this. He's like, I understand. But to have somebody like that, really, Ernest Owens is a gift to humanity. And if he's calling you out, it's because he's done his research. He has the receipts and it's true, which is why people get so pissed at him, because he does not have the privilege of a white cishead reporter to just like put out mediocrity. So, you know, when he's coming with something, it's true, right? But going back to your situation and my similar situation in 2009, if somebody is in that situation and doesn't have the privileges that we have, how would you tell them to navigate that, Lauren?
First, I would say there's a couple different levels. I will always say make sure that you're check in with yourself around like the aspects of health, with mental, physical, and then also like financial, right? Because once we're in those situations, it's like we're on a time clock. Either we're making the move or the organization is making the move. Like once we've gotten to that point, particularly if you file something, but like making sure that you're good and you're sound. I would say that I've consistently been with my therapist probably since 2018. And so when life's events are out of whack for me, I'm like, okay, I need more time. And one of the things that she was so helpful in saying, she's like, if you broke your foot, or hip foot surgery, which I hadn't had. She was like, think about all of the doctor's appointments that you went to like get back to where you needed to be. And she was like, I need you to think about the trauma that you're experiencing and like own it. It's not fun. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I need you to respond to that the same way you would respond to any other physical ailment, and really like paying attention to like your mental and emotional well-being. And so I would say definitely that I was going to my primary doctor more frequently, which was a positive and a negative, because she was like, your levels are out of whack. Like I just did blood work. And so actually what prompted me to go on a leave at the end of last year, she was just like, I was like, I'm just stressed out all the time. And she was like, well, you may have an ulcer. And I was like, oh, no. I was like, I'm too young for that. And she's like, technically you're not, but in a way, yes, you are. And she was like, this is how stress and trauma manifest in your body. And so I would say the first thing, getting your mental and physical health in shape, and like recognizing you don't do one and done, it's a journey, but making the commitment to prioritize that. But then also in terms of when you recognize that things are bad, sometimes HR can be helpful, but we recognize as a former HR professional, a lot of times organizations' jobs is to protect the organization regardless if it's right. And it's really hard for us to say that and accept that. But ultimately, it's very few organizations that do the right thing when they first hear about something. I always say, I'm waiting when these exposés come out. I'm like, I'm waiting for the organization to say that they didn't know, like that they literally had never been told or made aware of complaints. Because most times they know, they just don't act, and they don't pull the levers that are actually already at their disposal until public shame or protest. And so really thinking about when you go to HR, does that put start the time clock for you to be targeted, for you to be exited, for you to be laid off. We're in Pennsylvania. We're an at-will state. So technically, they can let us go at any time. Now, it's not a good practice because then you could potentially sue in the back end. But then that's a process to even get the litigation pieces. And so really thinking about, is going to HR really going to pull the lever that you need? But then also I would say, is it just time to go? And I struggle with that. Like, I really liked the work that I was doing, but the environment was just so toxic. And I was just like, it's like you're at a point where you're choosing your job mission, or like it's life or death for you after a while because of the impacts. And so really think about, is it worth it? And start looking for another job. And again, in this market, it's not easy per se just say, go get another job, maybe with the same pay, the benefits, but really doing your pro and cons list. Like, what are the absolute non-negotiables so I can sustain myself? And then think about, okay, if I really need to get out of here, do I have to get a job at my same exact salary? And like having those really hard conversations of what you prioritize. I meet plenty of people, particularly women, who are like, yeah, I took a pay cut, but this is the happiest, healthiest that I've been, and I would do it 10 times over. And so you have to make that decision for yourself. But then also finding people, it may be inside of work or outside of work, to serve as a community, a network for you. Because I think when you're navigating these spaces, just having people that you can not just commiserate with, but really talk about strategies, talk about to reassure you. Like, there were so many times, because I was in the department of one for so long, I would call other colleagues and just be like, is it just me? And then they're like, no, it's not. And so sometimes I would call other chief diversity officers. Sometimes I was calling family and friends that were aware of my situation and had navigated the professional space. So I would just really say, prioritize all aspects of your health. Yeah. Think about your situation, make a plan. Is it worth going to HR? And then like find community to support you, because I've noticed a lot of what happens is a lot of gaslighting and a lot of wearing down of victims, particularly in these situations. And the last thing I would say, because we'll speak it into existence, when you're out of the situation, think about what you want in your next organization. If you're taking the path to go back into another organization, because as much as they're interviewing you, you're interviewing them. And so I've started to ask questions when I started to look at new jobs, like, what are my baseline requirements around psychological safety, employee engagement? Does this work that I'm being asked to do even have a budget? And so like starting to do your research and come in more equipped, and using maybe this negative situation as a way to weed out maybe some bad actors that could be your future employer.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that, because when I got laid off in 2009, going back to manifesting, mind projects on body, and you basically described that, but I was 180 pounds overweight, couldn't sleep. At 3:00 every day, I would get a venti red eye from Starbucks. And if you don't know what that is, that's a large coffee with 5 shots of espresso. And I would drink it and still be exhausted. Like, that's a problem when you're 27. That shouldn't be happening. But, to Lauren's point, really look at the different bodies that you have: the emotional body, the spiritual body, the mental body, the emotional body. And what are those all saying to you? Because your body often knows way before you did. I mean, those 180 pounds didn't creep up like in a day. It just happened. And the universe, God, whatever you believe in, will put you in a situation where it's painful enough to get you to shift, right? And it's in a way that you can't look away from. And mine came in the form of being laid off. So, I love that. So what advice would you give to someone just starting in a leadership role that is not a white cishet male, right? Not that we don't love them, because there are some enlightened ones out there. We're still looking for you. So, but yeah, what would you say to an emerging leader?
I would say to an emerging leader, number one, know your why, and why are you doing what you're doing? And what is drawing you to the work, and what are your core values that are going to undergird and be the foundation for how you show up in the work. because oftentimes as you reach new levels, as people say, there are definitely new devils. And so you get maybe opportunities with more money, you get opportunities with more exposure. But then sometimes you're in situations where you may be making moral decisions, and knowing what your limits are, I would definitely say is super important. So when those situations arise, because most times, even if it's not in your first leadership role, it will eventually arise where you're forced to make some decisions that may go against your value system and or may go against your why and communities that you're a part of and or feel connected to or are accomplices to push forward their efforts may be the collateral damage of whatever is being asked of you. And so being prepared to stay rooted in that, I would also say, as much as possible, keep balance in your life. So these things around mental, physical, emotional support, don't let those go by the wayside. And so when you start to see, whoa, I'm noticing that I am more, I have more fatigue, or I'm noticing a lot of weight gain. I went through the same thing and I'm just like, what's going on? I'm like, I'm more active, but but it was the stress. And so it's really being clear also on having mentors and coaches and sponsors that you can trust, not only in your organization, but also outside of your organization. I think it's really important because sometimes people want to do the best that they can, but they're also getting paid by the same organization and they can only go but so far, because if you're in a leadership role, they're likely in a higher position than you. And so they're towing the company line. And so really making sure that you have a supportive network. And then the last thing I would say is just give yourself grace, and you're not always going to get it right. And recognizing that the goal is to, once you know better, to do better. And within that, part of that is recognizing that you may start out in one sector or in one leadership role and recognize this is no longer what I want to do, and just be flexible enough to always say, like, to be able and willing to pivot. Because as Kelly said, sometimes your body definitely recognizes before you do, and are giving you all the signs, but sometimes the universe or your superior being will push you to the brink to get you to open your eyes. So just staying grounded in your belief system and just being agile and flexible, but like definitely seek community and look for mentors and sponsors to be sounding boards, because it's not always going to be easy, but so having so much of the infrastructure in place for when you do hit those tough moments, I think is super helpful.
Yeah. And, going back to staying connected with your body, part of what burnout and stress does is disconnect you from your body. So if you're working with me as a client, one of the things I'll say is, okay, in that situation, go back in your mind's eye to that stressful situation. What are the emotions and physical sensations that are rising up? Because that's data that your body's giving you. And if you're so stressed that you're getting disconnected, then if I can ground you or help you get back to that point where you're connected, you usually know the answer. And you're right. I mean, you can't have people totally inside the organization. You have to have people outside. And going back to what Lauren said, do your research. Like, I would look on Glassdoor. What are the employees saying? If you're connected to anybody on LinkedIn, reach out to them, find out what the real situation is, because being sold something in an interview versus what it actually is oftentimes are different things. Look on TikTok, do your research, look at their digital footprint. Because another thing that I thought was so great was you said you're choosing. And that's something people don't realize, is that you're choosing to work at this place. You don't have to. Now, I know I have privilege saying that. I get that. And, 15 years running my own business, I'm probably unemployable in terms of like corporate America. But if you can, get your ducks in a row and get your network activated and all of that, you'll give yourself better opportunities. You really will. So are you okay with me ending with some rapid fire questions? They're really fun.
Yeah.
So what books are on your nightstand?
So currently 1619 Project and The Case for Cancel Culture, because I'm actually having my students read that, so I have to refamiliarize myself with that for the summer. And then also The New Jim Crow.
Oh, good. I haven't gotten to that one yet, but I have read The Case for Cancel Culture by Ernest Owens several times. I have the hardback, the audiobook, and the softcover.
Yes.
And you know what I love about that book is that it gives you both sides. Like, it's very evenly, it explains, like, and it also, I think, debunks the myth. People are like, oh, my next door neighbor Joe is going to get canceled. No. Kanye West will get canceled. The way Ernest explains it is, this has always been, cancellation has always been. It's just that now that we have social media, it's better to, like, we have more power that way. Favorite comfort food?
Favorite comfort food, tacos.
Yeah, any kind, like fish or?
So I love mahi-mahi tacos. I love carnitas. I can do some like adobo chicken, but I love mahi-mahi tacos.
Yum. Okay. What songs are on your playlist?
I am really in a very like zen place at the moment. So I've been listening to Sade a lot. I've been listening to some smooth jazz as well. So that's been kind of my mood, some gospel songs really in this season of, because normally I'm like, oh, like I'll like listen to like oldies or like 90s R&B, but like definitely in this season. And that's also like when you are noticing like your body is responding to the environment that you're in. Like even the type of music is just so relaxed right now.
Set and setting, man.
Yes.
Okay. What are you most grateful for in this moment right now?
Grateful for the lightness that I feel. And so it is something that I didn't realize that I had lost in so many aspects of life into now being here. I mean, like I wake up every day and I'm like, okay, so what am I doing today? And so I was telling someone like my goal is never to experience the Sunday night scaries ever again. And right now I don't have to deal with that. And like, that's like a good, that's a good like aspect of life. Cause like some of my friends, they're like, I'm like, how are you on Sunday night? They're like, I have a case of the Sunday night scares. I'm like, okay, like, what do you need in this moment? But I'm like, that's the goal, never to have that. So I'm grateful for the light that I feel right now.
I love that. And I've loved having this conversation. And thank you to our audience for listening. It's our intention on Hidden Human to inspire you to go out and have authentic conversations to deepen the connections in your life. Thank you so much and make it a great day.